Hi, I'm Dr. John Gaines. Today I'm going to be talking about a couple of very significant events that occurred within the Andrew Jackson presidency. The first is an assassination attempt. Toward the end of Jackson's presidency, Jackson will face the first assassin of or attempted assassin of a president in the United States history. In January the 30th of 1835, Jackson was returning to the White House from a funeral. Uh, as and the rest of the party, which included Davy Crockett, passed by the United States Capitol building, a man stepped out from behind a column in front of the Capitol building, pulled a single pistol, pointed it at Jackson, pulled the trigger, and the gun misfired. It did not fire. Being prepared, the man pulled a second pistol, pointed it at Jackson, pulled the trigger. That pistol misfired as well. And before anyone else could react, rather than taking cover, Andrew Jackson sprang upon this mysterious man and beat him senseless with his cane. There was a party of people with Jackson, and as I said, including Davy Crockett, the famous frontiersman, but there was no Secret Service at this time. The Secret Service itself would not be established until the 1860s during Lincoln's presidency, and even then it was mainly a force to control counterfeiting. So the president at this time is basically on his own. And so Jackson has, in this case, served as his own Secret Service by neutralizing this attacker. It turned out that after this man's arrested, it turns out that his name was Richard Lawrence. And the reason that he attacked Andrew Jackson is that he was an unemployed painter and he had succumbed to this delusion that he was rightfully the King of England. He was King Richard of England. And the reason that he attacked Jackson was that he believed that the American government and Andrew Jackson were withholding money that was rightfully his, and keeping him from going to England and assuming the throne. And so in light of that, he decided to attempt to assassinate Andrew Jackson so that he could get his money and go to England and become king. It didn't work out that way. Ultimately, though, Richard Lawrence spent the rest of his life in an insane asylum. So there's that. The other thing that is very significant with Jackson's presidency was the Bank War. And this happened a little bit earlier in 1832. After Jackson's election in 1832, he made perhaps one of his most famous policy statements. His most famous is probably Indian removal, but this is one of his more famous policy statements as far as getting rid of the second bank of the United States. Jackson, for much of his life, held a severe distrust of banks. And, a few years earlier, in 1819, because of actions that I'll talk about here in a minute, on behalf of the Second Bank of the United States, Jackson lost a significant amount of money through land speculation and fluctuations in the value of paper money. So Jackson lost a pretty substantial amount of money due to the actions of the Second Bank of the United States. And so he doesn't like banks in general, and he has a reason to dislike this bank in particular. Like I said, this is the second Bank of the United States. A first Bank of the United States, and these are banks where the United States government deposits most of its money into and does business there. These are semi-private holdings. The first Bank of the United States, though, was established under George Washington with the help of Alexander Hamilton. It was not rechartered. Its charter expired in 1811. There was a lot of opposition from state banks. There were also worries that foreign investment in the Bank of the United States could lead to some issues of foreign influence, as well as there was still a lingering concern over the constitutionality of the bank. The Bank of the United States, uh, from a strict constructionist standpoint, there's nothing in the United States Constitution that says that the government is allowed to create a Bank of the United States. It's not in there. Under a loose construction standpoint, which is what Alexander Hamilton was championing, there's nothing that prohibits you from creating a Bank of the United States. And so under Hamilton's urging, the Washington allowed this bank to be created. So there wasn't a lot of concern, though, during this bank's life. And it was chartered for 20 years. In 1811, at the end of that 20 years, there was a significant amount of distrust. And so the bank's charter was allowed to expire and the bank dissolved. Unfortunately, that was 1811. The next year, the United States enters into a war with England for the War of 1812. And during that year, with the absence of the Bank of the United States, the country suffers a significant financial catastrophe. And so several years later, in 1817, Congress establishes the second Bank of the United States, and that's the one that I'm going to be talking about. This one is also set up with a 20-year charter. So if for some reason this bank causes problems or defaults on much of its responsibilities, at the end of that 20 years, it will be dissolved. Unfortunately, they picked one of the worst presidents of the bank that they could possibly pick this first time out. The first president of the second Bank of the United States was a guy named Captain William Jones. Before being elevated to the rank of president of the Bank of the United States, Jones had just undergone personal bankruptcy. So he's not very good at controlling his own finances, yet they are going to put him in control of the finances of the United States, as the United States government is depositing large sums of money and mainly into this bank alone. Jones nearly ruined the bank within the first year. So the bank's established in 1817. Within that first year, Jones nearly ran it into the ground. He allowed the bank to overextend itself. He was granting a significant amount of loans when he really shouldn't have been. And he caused the Panic of 1819, and that's the one where Jackson lost a significant amount of money. So Jackson has a personal issue with this particular bank. Very quickly, though, William Jones is fired, and the next president was a very successful leader of the bank. This man's name was Nicholas Biddle. He very, very much moved the bank into becoming a much stronger and much more stable entity. Biddle was an incredibly smart guy. He was pretty much a genius. Nicholas Biddle, at the age of 10, attended the University of Pennsylvania, completed his degree requirements by the age of 13, but because he was so young, the university refused to grant his degree. Taking that in stride, Biddle then just went to Princeton. And at Princeton, he finished all of his degree requirements, graduated valedictorian at the age of 15. So Nicholas Biddle is sort of the 1800s version of Doogie Howser. Under Biddle's leadership, the bank did very, very well. The bank could actually regulate currency according to its perception of the nation's requirements. The bank was very, very stable. At this time, probably the modern day equivalent of the Bank of the United States would be the Federal Reserve. They regulate the value of currency by adjusting interest rates and influence the economy that way. The Bank of the United States pretty much was a very kindred spirit in that regard. But with all of this influence, especially being unregulated for the most part, Jackson greatly feared that this was a threat to the United States. He had a personal vendetta against this bank. It also was very, very powerful and didn't have a lot of influence or control. So Jackson did see this as a threat. And according to one of Jackson's most famous biographer, a guy named Robert Remini, Jackson attacked the bank with all of the fury that he normally reserved for Indians, British invaders, or cantankerous politicians. So he really, really went after this guy. Aside from Andrew Jackson, though, most people in the United States, including Congress, including other politicians, found the bank to be a stabilizing force. The House Ways and Means Committee found that the bank actually stabilized paper money, and they also determined that the bank was indeed constitutional. And a quick note on paper money. In the 1830s, the United States government issues specie, which is gold and silver coin. That is the currency of the United States. Paper money is issued by private banks. And because of that, paper money has the terrible, terrible habit at this point in time of fluctuating very, very much in value. And so the bank's ability to stabilize that value of paper money is incredibly, incredibly significant. However, none of those things shaped Andrew Jackson's opinion on the bank at all. He was still very, very much determined to get rid of the bank. And so during Jackson's re-election campaign, this is when this all comes to a head in 1832. Jackson is working on his second presidential election. He was first elected in 1828. 1832, he's up for re-election. And at that time, Biddle starts a campaign of his own to renew the bank's charter. The bank's charter is up for renewal in 1836. And Biddle sees this as a perfect opportunity. Jackson is facing a significant challenge in re-election. He's very, very popular, but Biddle is hoping to use the worry over re-election and the concern and wrapping that up into getting his bank rechartered. That most of the American public, including a significant amount of the American government, is in favor of rechartering the bank, and so he's hoping to use that goodwill by the American public to roll the recharterment into Jackson's re-election campaign. And so he's trying to force Jackson's hand because he knows that Jackson doesn't like the bank and wants to end the bank. And Biddle is successful in getting this up for a vote, and it passed Congress. The members of the Senate and the House pretty much all voted to renew the charter of the bank, but Jackson vetoed this. Now this is significant here as well, because even though Jackson vetoed the bank, that's vetoing the rechartering of the bank. And so the bank still has 4 years left on its charters. So it still exists for 4 years before it dissolves or somehow it's able to secure another charter. And that's possible if Jackson cannot be reelected in 1836, or well, he could be, but he doesn't run again. In 1836, when someone else is president, it's possible that person might sign off on the recharterment of the bank. And so Jackson wants to kill the bank now. He wants to destroy it immediately. And the quickest way that he sees to do that is to order the Secretary of the Treasury to cease depositing funds in the bank. The main source of revenue for the bank is the United States government depositing most of their funds into the bank. And so if we cut that off, the bank has no source of income and the bank will ultimately collapse. So he orders the Secretary of the Treasury to cease depositing funds. This is actually illegal. Congress has set this entire thing up. Congress has signed in that these funds are to be deposited with the Bank of the United States, and so they control this. And so that Secretary of the Treasury refused to do so. So Jackson fires him and hires another guy named Roger Taney. Taney agrees to do pretty much anything the president wishes. And so when the president orders him to stop depositing funds within the Second Bank of the United States, Taney agrees with no problem. And again, this is continuing in that effort to totally kill the bank so that it doesn't have any chance for a recharterment or even a veto override. A lot of the money that was previously deposited into the bank was scattered through a lot of smaller state banks. Those banks, unfortunately, were not as large, not as responsible, and so depositing money into those banks caused significant problems. In an effort to save his bank, Nicholas Biddle called in as many loans as he possibly could. If there was a chance that someone had a loan that he thought that they could repay immediately, Biddle called in those loans in order to secure as much funds that he could hold on to within the bank as possible. He also retains as much specie as possible. Remember, that's gold and silver coin, and it is a very stable monetary unit. So he holds on to as much specie as possible. These actions are going to push the United States economy close to a panic, and an economic panic in the 19th century is the same as an economic depression today. It's just simply another word for it. And so we're edging ever closer to an economic panic during this time. Jackson's response to the bank in an effort to further cause problems for the bank are actually going to further cause problems for the American economy. He issues what is called the Specie Circular. And in this, he declares that the United States government will only accept specie, gold and silver coin, as payment for taxes, purchases of land, tariffs, etc. Anything that the United States is taking money in for, we will only take specie at this point forward. And so this creates a very large shortage of gold and silver coin in the national economy. And this is what really pushes the economy over the edge and enters the United States economy into a full panic. In response to that, the United States Senate censures Jackson. Even Jackson's cabinet members are urging the president to stop this bank war, to stop trying to kill the bank, because it is causing such terrible ripples in the United States economy. On top of that, so the Senate has censured him. His cabinet is urging him to stop what he is doing. And finally, a significant number of Democratic Party members are leaving the party, and they are transitioning into the Whig Party because Jackson is having such a terrible impact on the United States economy. And, if that were to continue, it's very, very likely that in 1836, during the next presidential election, the Democrats will lose and the United States will have a Whig president and possibly Whig control of Congress. And so Jackson very, very quickly has to fix this problem. He has to spin this so that it seems that Nicholas Biddle is the bad guy in all of this. And so Jackson comes up with really an ingenious idea of turning American public opinion on this. Up until now, even with the ending of the United States stopping their for most of their deposits within the Bank of the United States, some monies were still being deposited in the bank because the Second Bank of the United States was responsible for paying out veteran pensions. So veterans from the American Revolution, veterans from the War of 1812, and other smaller conflicts were getting money from the United States government, but that money was going through the Bank of the United States. And so the bank was getting the money. They had all of the records as far as who this money was supposed to go to and how much was supposed to go to them. And so Jackson publicly ends the practice of veterans being paid through the Bank of the United States. This has a significant problem, though. The bank and Nicholas Biddle, as president of the bank, have all of those records. So the bank knows who's supposed to be paid, how much they're supposed to be paid, and Biddle refuses to turn that information over to the United States government. He says that Congress has decreed that I am charged with this responsibility, and so I'm not going to turn these records over. It is your responsibility to provide me with funds so that I can pay these veterans. But Jackson very quickly takes to the public domain, and in quite a bit of newspapers publicly proclaims that, this heartless man that dislikes American veterans, he's really capitalizing on the appreciation that many Americans hold for veterans. He says that this heartless man that evidently is not a fan of American veterans is not turning over the records so that I can pay you. And he's the one that is keeping the United States government from giving you your money for your service in the American Revolution and the War of 1812. And it worked. It worked fantastically. American public opinion very quickly began to shift away from Nicholas Biddle and began to realign itself with Andrew Jackson. And so people were not leaving the party anymore. Congress is even going to take an about face on their opinion of, the bank versus Andrew Jackson. Another House Ways and Means, the House Ways and Means Committee meets again, conducts a second study of this most recent panic, and determines that Nicholas Biddle was the one that caused that panic. Andrew Jackson's activities during that time really had nothing to do with it. And so Jackson, through spinning the news story and working on public opinion, gets his way, defeats the bank. The bank is destroyed and completely collapses. Overall, most historians believe that the bank was, in fact, a valuable asset to the country. Like I said earlier, it did have a very stabilizing effect on paper money, but it also did need some restrictions and some oversight. It had really neither of which. And so it very much needed those things. And so there could have very much been some middle ground here, but Andrew Jackson had it in his head that the bank must be destroyed, and so that's what he did. He destroyed the bank. If you have any questions over either of these issues, the assassination attempt or the bank war, or really any of the other material that you're covering in your readings, please feel free to shoot me an email or contact me on the discussion boards, and I'll be happy to clarify anything that you need. Thanks.